participants, welcome to this course on literature, culture and media. This is our first module, and in this module I would introduce you to the details of topics we are going to take up and the manner in which they would be discussed. Literature, culture and media together constitute an interdisciplinary framework to understand critical thinking in today's context. In this course, we would explore and also analytically evaluate what are the critical frameworks which are available to us in today's date about the intersections of literature, culture and media. We find that there are complex ways in which society and culture give rise to new forms of perspectives and ideologies, and these aspects of our experience are not static. In turn, we find that they determine the ways in which identities are constructed within specific material and social contexts. Literary theories are also a product of this. If we look at the aims and objectives of this course, we find that the primary aim is to strengthen the historical knowledge and theoretical understanding of relations which exist between and amongst literature, culture and media. It is basically a course which aims at theoretical understanding of different concepts and discusses various philosophical, aesthetic, critical and cultural topics. An analysis of the many forms in which literature enters media and public arena in contemporary times would also be taken up. Another aspect which is very crucial for us to understand is that we would be looking at the texts, but not only in a conventional manner. We would like to define, redefine and expand the definition of texts as we understand them today. We would look at certain texts in print, look at certain literary as well as non-literary works, look at the question whether visual, audiovisual, electronic and digital texts can also be contained within our purview of literary critical theories. When we look at the text, we have to understand that the textual entity continually interacts with the context as well as with the medium. Without understanding the context, a text can be misread or misinterpreted. It is the context which also provides newer and richer meanings to the text. The medium through which a text is being communicated to an audience is also important. So, we can say that medium, content as well as form produce a meaning through a continuous interaction. At the same time, how do we respond to the word literature? What constitutes the literariness in literature, and does the definition of what constitutes literary change and evolve over time? How do we differentiate between the literary and non-literary texts? We find that over the passage of time, there has been an evolution of texts. There have been different mediums and forms of texts. The genres also shift their shapes. The novel in the 18th century and the 19th century is now developing into an interactive fiction because of the changes in the media. We would also introduce different isms, different thought patterns and approaches towards a critical understanding of contemporary phenomena, including feminism, post-colonialism, postmodernism, deconstruction, post-structuralism, gender, cultural studies, as well as a discussion on the Frankfurt School of Thought. A familiarization with the history on debates on and about literature and or culture as arenas of human experience enriches our understanding to study and evaluate a particular literary phenomena. We would also take up a discussion on the historical, empirical and cultural analysis of contemporary forms of culture, literature, identity and power relations. A variety of theoretical approaches would be taken up and discussed thoroughly as they would be reflected through different mediums, and this would deepen and complicate the problematics of defining literature and culture in our society, which is now a digital as well as a post industrial society. To what extent does literature reflect and influence cultural norms? Can literature as well as media challenge and transform social relations? How do we view it as our society is moving towards different dimensions? Similarly, an understanding of these approaches would enable us to understand the extent to which literature teaches us about culture. Is there a need to situate literary production within a specific historical material domain? Is it necessary to refer to literature only as being reflected in a particular text, or do we enrich our understanding by looking at other similar contextual productions of literature and art? We would also look at questions related with the study of literature within the medium of its transmission of these literary pieces. At the same time, what is the relationship between our national literature and the notions of high art and culture? What is the role of academia and literary critics in the creation of literary canon? Does literary canon exist at all? So, what are the different kinds of literature which have been traditionally excluded from the canon? For example, works by women, works by black writers, or other minorities. So, what is the role of art and literature in modernism and postmodernism? How do we understand and respond to issues related with literary style in the 20th and the 21st century? What are the identity relationships and how do we express them in literature are some of the issues which we would also take up in our course of discussion. Culture in itself has various connotations. It is not possible for us to give a single identifying definition to this term. Culture has various processes which we would study in our modules. Literature and culture, as well as identity, have interrelationships, and the confluence of literary studies with media studies, media theories, and cultural studies would be taken up. It can be pointed out in this context that it was with the Frankfurt School of Thought, particularly the works of Adorno, Walter Benjamin, and Horkheimer, that people started to pay attention on the commodification of culture as well as issues of art in any capitalist society. They also raise questions about art and mass culture. So, our perception regarding literary canon, our perceptions about what constitutes the popular culture and popular art started to take a particular shape. So, in the beginning of the 20th century, the Frankfurt School and philosophers associated with it started to introduce certain changes in our understanding of the word culture. This understanding was further shaped by the Birmingham Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies, which took up various debates about the origin and development of different types of cultures. They talked about the dominant, emergent, and residual forms of culture. So, we would take up a review of the contribution by Hogarth, Stuart Hall, and Raymond Williams to understand how to define this term culture with its various connotations. It also brings us to a revaluation of ideology, to our discussions to a new form of cultural Marxism, and we would look at the works of Gramsci and Foucault, look at Foucault's notion of knowledge, power, and governmentality, as well as surveillance and panopticism. A re-evaluation of the binaries of high and low culture and the problems of defining them would also be contextualized in our discussions. Along with literature and culture, we would also be looking at the fields of media studies in relationship with literary studies and the formation of culture. An analysis and understanding of the numerous forms of media through which information is communicated is becoming more and more pertinent in our days because of recent technological changes and developments. There has been a historical relationship between literature and media, and we can look at its evaluation from various socio-cultural perspectives too. But let us say that today, medium of literature is no longer secondary to the literary content and form. Medium has become significantly more important with the development of media technologies. Literary content and form can very deeply be influenced by the medium through which we are trying to transmit it. It is introducing new developments in the literary genres, and a traditional understanding is dwindling away. The literary production and the influence of the specific forms of media, which is dominant at the time of their production, also put certain constraints in the way a reader approaches a particular literary production. We can take the example of the genre of novel. The development of the novel could be a possibility because of the development of the technology of the printing press. So, technology in a way has been related with the emergence of a new literary form. It was related with the emergence of periodicals, newspapers, pulp fiction during the 18th and 19th century. So, we can say that the reception of literature is influenced by the dominant media forms, and this was never truer than what it is in the context of our contemporary times. We find that the latest developments in media are also influencing the way literature is being produced and received, the way we look at culture and understand it. New media forms are impacting literary production now. The cultural style of popularizing or reworking works of literature for mass market consumption in the form of comics, adaptations in films and TV series is also growing. A creation of a new genre or a type of text is inspired by texts which are often taken from the literary canons, but they are being reworked to popularize them among the masses through a consumerist market strategy. So, we have adaptations of Shakespeare, for example, into films, in TV serials, graphic novels, and modern theatrical renditions. The content may also be slightly modified, and themes can be introduced to make them more contemporary. A reworking of traditional forms of literature through non traditional means and unexpected means has also become popular. We are looking at a contemporary phenomena when graphic novels are being written on the basis of those literary works which earlier were considered to be sacrosanct, having been placed in the literary canon. We also have now a study of online and board games. Self referential films and TV series are being made and studied. We have interactive fiction instead of a traditional novel form. We have Twitter and Instagram poems, fan fiction written on blogs, online serialization of literature. So, we find that suddenly in the 21st century, literature has gone through an absolute change of shape. Print and radio have also affected our understanding of literature as well as culture. So, in the course of our discussions, we would look at the contributions of these technological developments in changing our cultural perceptions and in changing the way literature is produced and received by the people. We would look at radio plays, the rise of orality over written forms, adaptation of literature to suit the content requirements of a radio. When we talk about the relationship between the print and the radio, we have to look at the impact of literature and different literary forms on radio programs. So, we find that there have been serializations of literature not only to radio but also to the other different mediums like TV. So we have different TV films or TV series which have been based on popular books. Literature is also intrinsically linked with films. So we can say that with the development of different media forms, literature has also changed shape. But at the same time, the linkages between literature and changing media perspectives has always been there. All these types of media, whether it was radio or TV or film or of late internet, if we look at the relationship between print and films, we find that literature has resulted into various cinematic adaptations, and there is a close relationship between films and literature despite various differences which exist between these two ways of expressions. When we look at the adaptation of novel, for example, or another piece of literature into a popular film, we have to grapple with the questions of originality. We have to look at how our meaning can change, and can an adaptation remain faithful to the original. So what is the critical obsession with the fidelity discourse? Do we treat a film adaptation as an independent work of art, or do we look at it merely as a translation? Similarly, we find that literature has a presence in the age of internet also. We find that in our days of social media, new literary forms are emerging. We are looking at blog writing, digitalization of books, digital libraries, change in the modalities of reading and writing with technological developments. But as I had mentioned earlier, basic linkages and relationships with literature have never been absolutely refuted by any changing media. But it does pose certain new questions. For example, what it is like to write using a computer software as opposed to preparing a manuscript by hand, or preparing a manuscript with the help of a typewriter. So now in the 21st century, we are not looking simply at literature or culture or media in isolation. What we are looking at is a solid beginning of digital humanities. Digital humanities is never away from the previous concerns of literature, literary criticism, media, or cultural artifacts. On the other hand, we find that retaining older debates within its fold, digital humanities is presenting newer and different challenges to us today. So, we would also devote certain modules to the discussion of challenges which we have to face in the context of digital humanities. We would also critically look at the relationship between media and culture. Media is related not only with literature, but it has an intrinsic relationship with culture also. An academic study would be taken up to investigate how various forms of media, literature, newspaper, radio, TV, films, etc., shape society, politics, and culture, and consequently identity and human experience. So, what is media and communication studies? So, we have to look at the explosion of new media in an industrial world, as well as the explosion of new media in a post industrial world. We would look at different forms of media, old as well as new. We would begin with an evaluation of the print technology and its relationship with culture, how it impacted culture, paper technology, oral culture versus print culture, printing press and its impact on literature, culture and society, Renaissance and Enlightenment and their relationship with print culture. When we would look at different media, we would look at, to begin with, the media of print. In the print media, we would look at the novels, periodicals, newspapers, and the history of development of all these forms. We would also critically look at the evolution of the freedom of the press, state restrictions on what kind of news can be published, the type of newspapers, how they have developed from penny newspapers to broadsheets to the tabloids later on, the development of telegraph, consolidation of media conglomerates, etc. In the context of the media of radio, we would look at telegraph, optical fiber, wireless telegraphy, and how from being used in marine navigation only, they were later on used extensively for war propaganda and became a powerful mass media till it was taken up by the television. We would also look at the development of films, how the word and the image have an intrinsic relationship and they cannot be isolated absolutely and categorically from each other. From the days of prehistoric cave paintings, sculpture, print, camera obscura, and photography, we have moved to the developments in cinematography. The role of technological developments in creating a new audiovisual mass media form would be viewed. How the beginnings of photography, cinematography, the role of telegraph and optical fiber gradually grew into encompassing and enchanting medium. We would also look at the history of cinema, how cinema has reached today's situation. We would look at the development by discussing the contribution of the Lumiere brothers, realism versus formalist debates, eventual development of editing as a technique of storytelling, rise of narrative cinema, and the beginnings of the studio systems. It is interesting to refer to the American and Russian differences in terms of editing a film. Whereas Hollywood prefers a seamless editing technique and their idea is to create immersive narratives, the Russians pioneered the formalist method of filmmaking, and to them, editing was at the heart of the cinema. So we will look at Kuleshov effect, how the meaning is produced through correlation of different shots. We would look at how Pudovkin and Eisenstein developed the Soviet theory of montage and how it became an important element in storytelling, constantly disrupting a willing suspension of disbelief. In the context of various contemporary critical debates, the discussions on literature and films have always held a significant place. Is cinema art or a form of mass entertainment only? What has made films a unique art form? What do they borrow from literature? And can literature also borrow from film techniques? What is the relationship between film and literature? So we would look at these different ideas from the perspectives of some established masters. How people like Conrad and Griffith, Balzac, Bluestone, and Benjamin tried to explain these questions. We would also look at the development of film history through different phases, depending on genres, themes, developments of cinematic tools also. During the three phases of film theory, we would also look at different approaches which can be taken up towards the evaluation and understanding of a film. For example, we can take up either feminist or psychoanalytic or Marxist or auteur or post-structuralist or postmodern approach to understanding a film. At the same time, when we look at film criticism, we have to look at the significance of the technique in the making of a film. For example, what is the role of mise-en-scène over there? How is the scenery background given a particular idea to a movie? How does it help in the representation of the idea, which is a part and parcel of the content of a film? What are the types of shots which can be taken up? What is the significance of camera angles and movements? And ultimately, we would discuss what has been the influence of cinema on culture, and also what is the significance of the impact of technology on cinema industry, not only on the cinema but also on the cinema industry. So we would look at different developments of television as well as film, the reign of DVDs and rental technology, internet and films. We would also look at questions of piracy, multiplexes, digital filmmaking, a rise of 3D and 4D in this context. The relationship of media and technology is also critically evaluated by various thinkers from time to time. When we look at the development of the 20th century critical thought, our mind goes to Harold Innis and his ideas about technological determination. He has looked at the technological developments in media influences the nature and kind of societies, difference between predominantly oral and post-print cultures and societies, and how media determines how we perceive the world around us. So, we would take up different media theories as well as different media models and look at their pros and cons in the course of our discussions. Major media theories and models which we are going to take up are hypodermic or magic bullet model, social responsibility theory, that is a combination of media freedom and feedback mechanism, Gerbner's mean world syndrome, two-step flow theory, agenda setting theory, uses and gratifications theory, Hodgkinson's model, the reciprocal flow of media and culture, as well as Weist model, which explains the role of mass media in the diffusion of culture. In our understanding of media and culture, we simply have to talk about the Marxist as well as the neo Marxist approach. So, we would take them up also, as well as we would look at the influence of media on culture during the 60s and 70s, for example, the hippie culture. We would also take up the major media theorists in our discussions. We would take up Marshall McLuhan particularly and his theoretical works about how media is the message and his concept of the global village and the liberating qualities of electronic media would be taken up in detail. So would be his ideas about the machine and the electric age. His ideas about hot and cold media would also be taken up in discussion. We would also look at the developments of electronic media and its impact on identity and human experience, as well as an evaluation of contemporary postmodern media, including the internet, the digital culture, emailing, blogs, and how these digital mediums are not absolutely free of traditional cultural constraints, and the imprint of them is reflected even in the digital mediums. When we would look at the medium of television, we would begin with the discussions of its origin and gradually move on to the different technological developments and how with each technological development the cultural value also undertakes a change. What has been the impact of war on TV sales? What has been the golden era of TV? What are the changes when one adopts literature for radio and the same literary piece for a TV? Reworking of earlier formats in the TV medium, development of new TV formats, chat shows, adaptation of classical books, news, etc., would also be taken up. When we will look at the interrelationship between culture and TV shows, we would look at the issues based on reciprocity, how they reflect broader cultural tendencies, the ability of this media to challenge stereotypes, biases, and how it is a powerful tool of ideological domination as well as of formation of public opinion. Media is never far away or totally detached from technological developments. TV is also not an exception. So we would look at the cable TV and satellite TV, and we would move on to a discussion of the internet TV. How through the internet TV it has now being developed as an interactive medium with a greater control over what, when and how to watch show, and how it is challenging the domination of network channels. We have the phenomena of on-demand channels and the development of online streaming platforms like Netflix, Hulu and Amazon Prime, and there are struggles which are going on with online piracy. At the same time, we would look at the contribution and significance of the internet technology, because it is responsible for the development of new forms of media. There is a rise of computer mediated communication to the extent that our culture has now become a networked culture. The world has truly become a global village, and we are now in the process of witnessing the creation of virtual communities and societies. So, what has been the significance of Web 1 and Web 2 technology? How a more interactive technology has made our media more interactive, and how it has brought about changes in the way culture is perceived and presented to us, and also in the ways literature is produced, disseminated, and responded to. So, we would look at different theories of digital communication as well as approaches to digital media. Mass media is unidirectional in terms of creation of content. Producers create content and consumers consume it. However, with digital media and internet, we find that the divide between producer and consumers has blurred. It has revolutionized how media is perceived and consumed, so there is a greater interactivity and reciprocity, and at the same time, there is a sense of immediacy which was absent in any other previous media forms. So, the availability of information and the capability to share it immediately are certain issues which have changed our notions about culture as well as media as well as literature. So, now we are talking about media convergence. There is a relationship between old mass media forms and digital media, but now we are in the process of creating new and fresh and unheard of digital based media only. The digital advancement has given us greater connectivity, and at the same time, we find it has been responsible for giving rise to a different type of writing. For example, blog, email, digital literary journals. So, already we find that the changes in literature and culture are visible because media has changed. When we talk of media, the significance of social media cannot be underestimated. Significance of platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, Pinterest, Snapchat are there. They have their pros and cons, but certain features are common in all of them. A consumer also becomes a participant, and it gives rise to new forms of expression. It gives rise to greater connectivity, but at the same time, we find that the divide between real and virtual identity has started to pose problems for people. There are certain threats also. For example, the threat of data mining, continuous surveillance, and there are concerns over privacy. Many of them remain to be valid. At the same time, there are various developments also. The growing scope and possibilities of digital humanities have revolutionized our perception of culture and literature. We are talking in the context of digital libraries where easy and immediate access is available to everybody. At the same time, we find that these changes have introduced certain fundamental shifts in the way we are leading our life. So, new areas are also emerging in the context of critical literary studies and cultural studies. For example, a field like game studies is also emerging. What exactly are games? Do we study them in the same manner in which we used to study a literary text earlier? Are they events or processes? And what is gameplay? History of game studies is being taken up as a discipline now, and different critical approaches are being developed. We would review them along with the notions of ludification and gamification. We would go deeper into these changing perceptions and challenges of a ludic culture. So, on the one hand, we look at interesting developments in the context of media and literary production. On the other hand, we find that our culture is not free of several biases, and often The latest media technology also becomes a victim to these constraints. Sexist attitudes and culture, which is reflected in different ways in which women are being represented in media, remains to be an issue of concern. And these sexist biases can be seen in children's books, in films, in TVs, video games, magazines, and advertisements. So we would view them when we would be looking at the reciprocal relationship between media and culture. Media and gender are important because gender is related with our social conditioning, and there are different ways in which men and women perceive a cultural product and a cultural phenomena like writing to somebody else. Even in the digital world, we find that the identity of gender does not remain anonymous because different genders opt for different cultural and linguistic registers. An evaluation of how different forms of mass media can approach a similar event and showcase different understandings would also be taken up. There may be a situation when literature, films, TV, social and digital media approach a single event and they represent and tackle it differently. It would be taken up with a case study of the partition narratives of India. And we would discuss how the perceptions of audience change over time and how does media represent over the years these changes, tracking them, abating them and underlining them. During this course, we aim at the development of skills of close and creative readings. Through a critical awareness of text and their context, a participant would be able to pay attention to process, social context, performance, and other supposedly ancillary or non essential aspects of text or artifacts, which nonetheless help us to create an estimate about their significance as a part of our cultural process. An exploration of a range of current and contemporary trends and approaches in the humanities and social sciences would encourage the participants to specialize in an area of literature which is close to their interest. We would explore together the relationship between literature, media, and other forms of expression and refine critical and intellectual abilities in dynamic and gripping teaching and learning contexts. The different ways in which we can engage with media, material conditions of communicative acts, technologies of writing, and phenomenology of new media would also be taken up. Together, we would study literary and media texts, both as expressions of the societies and cultures that have produced them, and as active agents in the creation of individual and collective experience of how we actually live. It would help us in understanding and learning a range of competencies and skills which would be transferable to different situations. So, how human beings determine the texts of their lives, and in turn, how these texts shape their world, carry their pasts, and point to their futures. We would be talking about those transferable competencies which are required in a culture which is now being challenged by the encroachments of artificial intelligence. So, together we begin our journey into this course. Thank you.